Welcome back to the Indian Wisdom Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Raj Balkaran. More importantly, you are looking for inspired, accessible insight that you can apply to everyday life, and perhaps a tale or two might be told. There have been a great many questions and requests for content pertaining to the upcoming solar eclipse. Now, in the timeless time of podcast land, this might be upcoming for you, or this might be in your rear view mirror. Specifically, what is being referred to is the great total solar eclipse that is occurring on Monday, April the 8th, 2024. What is significant about this eclipse is its path. The path of totality bisects a little country called America, also known as the United States of America, which might be to some a misnomer. So we'll just call it America for now. There's much to be said about this and the symbology. Perhaps we should begin about with the significance of eclipses in general. In ancient Indic wisdom traditions, there is a branch of auxiliary Vedic sciences, if you will, the Vedangas, the limbs of the Veda, the branches of knowledge which render useful and accessible Vedic thought, Vedic revelation, Vedic insight. Now, among the six, we have, for example, Vyakarana, right? Grammar or Nirukta etymology. We have meter, prosody, ritual, and Jyotisha, the ancient practice of sky gazing, stargazing, casting your gaze up to the heavens and making sense of the motions which meet the eye. This is an ocean of knowledge. Jyotisha is understood as the eye of the Veda. Jyotisha, the name for Vedic astrology, astronomy, comes from the Sanskrit word for light. And this there's a beautiful pun there. Not only is this the sacred science of light, the light of the celestial spheres, but it also sheds great light. It is understood to confer deep insight upon those who pay careful attention to the heavenly spheres and who are equipped with knowledge on interpretation of the omenology thereof. Right? This is all thought of as very sophisticated omenology. Now, one of the fundamental distinctions between Western astrology and Indic astrology is the cast of characters in terms of planets or grahas, to use the Sanskrit. We have the 5 visible natural planets, Atara grahas. Those would be, well, we have the 5, and then we have the 2 luminaries, sun and moon. So in order of the days of the week, we have Sunday, that's the sun's day. Moon day, Monday. Tuesday is Mars. Wednesday is Mercury's day. Thursday is Jupiter's day. Friday is Venus's day. And Saturn's day, right? We've got the 5 natural planets, 2 luminaries, sun and moon, and the cast of characters amounts to 9. There are 2 additional grahas, planets, but graha really means seizer, grasper. What are they grabbing? They're grabbing your consciousness, your awareness. The understanding is that while under the sway of the grahas, ever ask yourself, what possessed me to do that? Well, perhaps possession is the right metaphor or the right lens through which to view certain human activities, because according to Indic wisdom traditions, the planets possess us to exhaust our karmas. The 2 remaining possessors, or grahas, are Rahu and Ketu. Today's tale will be surrounding the creation of Rahu and Ketu. These are actually intense points in space where the orbit of the moon around the Earth intersects the orbit of the Earth around the sun. There are two such points in space. They're called nodes in Western parlance. There's a north node and there's a south node. The north node is Rahu, the head of a demon without a body, and the south node is Ketu, the body of a demon without a head. And their personifications are laden with symbology in terms of what they confer. Right? So Rahu very much is about the head. Me, look at me. Cannot digest. Disembodied. Yes, Rahu is the flavor of our age, it seems, in many ways. Ketu is headless. It will just follow whatever is compelling in the moment, perhaps. It's much more complex than this, of course, but just to give you a framework for understanding. So Rahu and Ketu, these very specific points in space, are exactly responsible for eclipses. Okay, when the luminary sun and moon conjoin these points in space, either on a new or a full moon, an eclipse occurs. If this conjunction occurs under the auspices of a full moon, you have a lunar eclipse. Have you noticed? Eclipses only occur when the moon is full. And if this conjunction occurs, i.e., of the luminaries and the nodes, at a new moon, then we have a solar eclipse. So the solar eclipse is, of course, occurring during a new moon. Eclipse season happens typically once a year, while around the time of the year when the sun is conjoining the nodes. And they will more often than not come in pairs, right? Because that conjunction will last for the fortnight between new and full moon. So what the ancient sky watchers did during eclipses was not only watch the eclipse, but they would pay careful attention not just to the heaven, but to the earth, to the path of the eclipse. It is understood that the influence of the eclipse pertains primarily to that which lies in its path. Now, this may well be fascinating. One may take this as spirituality or symbology. Nevertheless, in terms of the real world, the practical world, the physical gross world, the materialistic world in which we inhabit, which we can view with our five senses, it is beyond fascinating that the eclipse bisects America. Well, North America, teeny bit into Mexico, and just around the border, the northeast border, the northeast portion of America, which borders into Canada. And what's utterly fascinating is that there was another such solar eclipse whose path touched America alone in 2017 under the auspices of the first couple of months of the reign of a particular president. Fascinating still is that this president himself was literally born during an eclipse. Now, this may be happenstance. This may you chalk it up to whatever you like to chalk it up to, right? But if you don't find this fascinating, you don't have a pulse. Of course, this is endlessly fascinating, right? And this particular president might be described as a walking eclipse. The energy of the eclipse, according to Indic wisdom traditions, is wonky, tumultuous. The energy of Rahu is the energy of the shapeshifter, the energy of the rebel without a cause. If Rahu is leveraged with another energy, then it's a rebel with a cause. But I just want to push back. I just want to break free. I just want to, everything you say, I want to counter just to counter. exhaustingly so. There is clearly a purpose to debate and exchange of ideas. The energy of Rahu just wants to counter for the sake of counter. It lives for disruption and division. This isn't a new context. Oh, we live in such divisive times. The quote unquote demons are literally the children of Diti, who literally means division. Children of the gods, their step siblings, are children of Aditi, non division or unification. There are those among us, irrespective of class or creed, irrespective of gender, ethnicity, age, vocation, occupation, predilection. There are those among us who are here to unite us, and there are those among us who are here to divide us. And if you do not realize this, then you would be wise to notice this. There are those among us who are here to divide us under the guise of uniting us, etc., etc., etc. Of course, nonsense needs to be called out. Of course, toxic systems of power and prejudices need to be called out. Indeed, indeed, indeed. But at the end of the day, do we want blood or do we want peace? Yes. And so eclipses are tumultuous times. They are, according to ancient wisdom traditions, not favorable times for the genesis, for the beginning of significant ventures, marriages, opening businesses, this and this and this and this and that. Now, it doesn't mean one should lock oneself up for the day of the eclipse or the days leading up to it. Perhaps it might be well advised to not plan any delicate or serious conversations around those days. But anecdote has it that sometimes that's what needs to come up during that time. And so these conversations arise, they erupt, right? So part of the energy of Rahu is explosiveness and expansion. Things just arise. People who are, for example, unknown and all of a sudden they're famous. That typically is the energy of Rahu, things that arise all of a sudden and often dissipate all of a sudden. Okay. This is the energy. Now, the nodes represent shadow, and there's a very rich avenue of thought, a very rich avenue of processing along the lines of nodal symbology and the Western discourse on shadow, the psychological notion of shadow and all that lies in your shadow, what lies in your blind spots, right? So on the one hand, the nodes eclipse or darken the luminaries, the sources of light, the sun and the moon. On the other hand, shadow becomes illumined. People see more clearly once the eclipse has passed. There's a beautiful expression in English that was created because of the energy of Rahu. You can fool some of the people all the time and all of the people some of the time, but you cannot fool all the people all of the time. It's impossible. It's just not possible. But that fooling, that occlusion, that obfuscation, this is the energy of the nodes. Antithetical to the luminaries, but for the wise one, for the alchemist, for the wielder of wisdom, shadow is not merely antithetical, it is complementary. Shadow and light. That was one understood without the other. Shadow is the greatest of gurus. If only you know how to be a student. Long ago, the demons and the gods worked together to procure the elixir of immortality from the cosmic oceans. They needed to churn the cosmic ocean, source of all things. Okay. Mount Meru was used as a churning pole around which was wrapped Vasuki, king of serpents, who volunteered his body to be used as a churning rope. Vishnu himself, great preserver, incarnated as a great tortoise, swam to the bottom of the sea so that the Mount Meru could be placed upon his back. This literally occurred on the back of Vishnu. The gods lined up on one side of the celestial ocean. The demons on the other side. They made a pact. They agreed to work together in order to procure the elixir of immortality. Okay. And they begun, so the churning begun arduous at first, like all things worthwhile, yes. Soon after they began churning, a substance emerged from the celestial oceans and shot straight up into the air. Wow, that was easy. No, not so much. The demons and gods were delighted, thinking, well, here's the elixir. But their delight soon turned to horror once they realized that the substance was poison. What a great irony. In search of the elixir of immortality, poison emerges to imperil them all. Who can become immortal once dead? Now, the great god Shiva, we've mentioned him a number of times, Lord of yogis, Lord of yoga, Lord of beasts, Pashupati. He's this powerful alchemist, if you will, capable of subjugating his animal impulses and becoming one with the one, through thunderous effort. Shiva had the ability to see, to remote view through means of his third eye, sort of like a wireless psychic zoom without all the tech. Yeah. So he zoomed in, so to speak, and saw what was happening at the scene and immediately transported himself there because he knew that if the poison were to descend, the demons and the gods would be destroyed, and they both had a role to play in this creation. So he positioned himself in the blinking of an eye beneath the descending poison and opened wide his mouth to allow the poison to enter it. And all were aghast. Would Shiva swallow the poison? Would he sacrifice himself to save creation? Or would he spew the poison upon all present? And would they be destroyed? Which is it? Is it A or is it B? Well, if you have yet to learn this, wisdom often requires you to adopt a third path that is non-binary, not quite A or B. So Shiva neither swallowed the poison, nor did he spit it out. He lodged it in his throat and neutralized it by his yogic power. Through this great feat, his throat turned blue, and from that day henceforth, one of his great epithets was Nilakanta, the blue-throated lord. They all praised Shiva, blue throat, for his brilliant and fierce power, his ability to neutralize the poisons of life. Now, tell me something. When you encounter toxicity, do you swallow it? If so, you're poisoning yourself and saving up for a tumor one day. Do you spew it out? Do you poison those with whom you come into contact? It's either or, it's one or the other typically, lest you have the wisdom and strength to avert internalizing the toxicity of others and also equally avert externalizing the toxicity of others or even the toxicity of self. This is a profound state. Yes. After Shiva was praised, the churning continued. For eons, the churning went on, and various riches emerged. Think about something very difficult in your life that you endeavor to accomplish, or you have to accomplish. I want to build a business. I want to transform my body. I want to, earn a degree. Arduous at first. Through persistent, consistent effort, various fruits emerge. No? Of course. So various riches emerge from the cosmic oceans. Among them, for example, Indra's five-headed elephant, right? Airavata, Kamadhenu, the cow of plenty, a wish-fulfilling tree, various nymphs, precious gems, formulas, mantras, riches galore, even Lakshmi, whose tale we'll tell another day, even the goddess of abundance, the goddess of sustenance, the goddess of prosperity, of light, the goddess of wellness and well-being, of relationships. Even she emerged from the celestial churning, and her first act was to choose a loving mate. And she chose Vishnu. Hers is a tale of another day. Okay. And beyond the emergence of Vishnu, at long last, a great sage, Dhanvantari, the father of Ayurveda, the science of life, ancient Indic holistic medicine, okay, emerged cradling an effulgent vessel. Instantly, the demons and gods knew what was inside. The elixir of life, at long last procured. Now, the gods knew they needed the help of the demons to churn the celestial ocean. But they never intended to share it. And in all fairness, neither did the demons. They both were using the other for the sake of the task at hand. It's a really powerful insight here in terms of any of you who are interested in shadow discourse, shadow work, that the leveraging of the shadow is required. Yes. There's so many narrative vignettes from Indic myth and world mythology, or even modern sci-fi fantasy. The brilliant encounter of Luke Skywalker and Vader. What's Vader? Big old shadow. He faces a shadow eventually. First time he gets his hand chopped off. Second time he becomes a Jedi Knight. It is the shadow and the encounter with the shadow which completes the hero's quest, which confers upon the seeker the status they seek. Now, there's so many examples. There is a brilliant narrative exposition of this principle in Lord of the Rings with the wizard Gandalf. Actually, Gandalf was pretty, he's pretty with it. He's pretty wise. He's got, all kinds of powers and spells and knowledge on his side. And he dreads the mines of Moria. He dreads this ancient shadow, this demon of shadow and light, the Balrog. He's terrified. Probably many more of you will have watched the movies and have read the book, but as soon as the Balrog emerges, when they're all beneath the mountain, this is emblematic of the unconscious. He's terrified. And he's like, run, your weapons won't work here. When the wizard says run, you're in trouble. So they're all running, escaping this great, terrifying shadow entity. And they get to the bridge of Khazad-dûm, the bridge that leads them out into the mundane world, right? Quote unquote real world. And this entity is about to cross the bridge and enter the real world. Now, this is metaphoric of what happens when dark forces from the subconscious forcefully invade and pervade the conscious mind. And this typically results in some sort of madness, if you will, or possession. And Gandalf, being, this guardian, among other roles that he plays, he's like, okay, I don't really care about me, but I have to set a boundary. We cannot allow the Balrog to desecrate the world. So he sets a boundary, a brilliant boundary. He remembers, wait, I'm more than my terrified self. Right? There are great forces which I can plug into. Right? I myself am grace for others, but I myself should ask for grace. And he remembers, wait, why am I terrified? What does he say? He says, I'm a servant of the secret fire, wielder the flame of honor. The dark fire will not avail you. Flame of Odin, go back to the shadow. Very famous YouTube clip, probably. You shall not pass. And he stops the Balrog in his tracks. He earns his status. He gains courage. And the Balrog pulls him in. And he's lost the shadow. And he battles the Balrog. He encounters the shadow. He battles the shadow. And it is through that encounter whereby Gandalf the Grey becomes Gandalf the White. It is a purificatory process. The demons and gods must work together, right? But the demons, perhaps out of prudence, had no inclination to actually share the spoils of the churning. And the gods out of prudence and the demons out of probably desire for domination and destruction had no notion of sharing the poison either. Elixir of life. And so they make a mad dash, and guess who gets there first? Well, you guessed it, the demons get there first. And they usurp the elixir of life, and the gods are aghast. They're horrified, having endured such great toil. The elixir of life is in the hands of the demons. Now, poor Vishnu, it's his job to preserve. Brahma creates, Shiva destroys. Well, yeah, they're important, but they're teeny frames of creation. For the time that creation endures, sure, Brahma doles out advice here, and Shiva intervenes here and there, such as neutralizing the poison, but it falls on Vishnu to do as he must to preserve creation. So how does he deal with the demons? Well, if anyone has known the demonic, whether in human form or otherwise, one knows there's no reasoning with such people. Bartering sometimes, but not often. The only viable strategy for dealing with such people, such entities, is trickery. You fight fire with fire. Right. So he disguises himself in feminine form, donning the garb of a great, lovely nymph, Mohini. Now, obviously, this narrative comes in a particular cultural context, and there's certain gender implications here. And I invite you to take this more archetypally, and whatever you fancy or don't fancy, feel free to switch genders as you like. But in this context, it is understood that these male demons would find this entity attractive. Right? It is also understood that she's not real. She's a projection of Vishnu's Maya, his illusory power. Mohini comes from the word moha, infatuation. The deep wisdom here is that the demons, this impulse, the word demon is really problematic because we don't want to demonize the demons. I know how silly that sounds, but this is an aspect of self which takes us away from the eternal. This is an aspect of self which thwarts the pursuit of immortality. It's necessary to push against this aspect of self for our pursuit of immortality. But if we let this aspect of self drive, we'll go off the cliff. We will not, in so many tales, a demon or two are seeking immortality, and in exactly all of them, they're denied such. Right? So this impulse is the capacity to obsess, to be infatuated. It has no option. So it's not a question of whether it's infatuated. The question is, what is it currently infatuated by? What are you obsessing over now? So what Vishnu does is he gives them something else to obsess about and be infatuated by. So they lose their interest in the elixir of life. This is also the aspect of self that is pursuing instant gratification, sometimes at the expense of a long-term goal. We've all been there, yeah? Okay. To this day, Mohini evades them, for she's nothing more than a projection of Vishnu. Smoke and mirrors, as it were, deployed to distract them. Okay, the disaster now averted. The gods secure the vessel of ambrosia and carry it off to the celestial abode to have just an enormous party, a celebration. You're seated in a circle, passing the pot, no pun intended, from deva to deva, from deity to deity, each in turn imbibing a drop of the celestial ambrosia, and thereby attaining immortality, ananda, bliss everlasting. Although the demons were fooled by Vishnu's ruse, the greatest trickster among them, Swarbhanu, saw through the ruse. We can say Rahu. Okay. Saw through the ruse because he's a master of disguise. This is what this energy confers in natives and in the field, according to Indic wisdom traditions, in the field of karma. It confers people, places, things which delude, which deceive. Alternately, it's actually a time where the world or individuals or families see what was hidden sometime between the eclipse cycle, between the lunar and solar eclipse. What was hidden about self or other becomes visible. Or if you're intent on delusion, you'll be more deluded than ever before. Okay. Does this at all sound like anything happening in America these days? I'll return to the path of the eclipse in a moment. Let us continue to tell the tale of the celestials assembled, imbibing the ambrosia, attaining immortality, and the demon disguised as a god who sneaks into the assembly among them to join the festivities. Seated in the sacred circle, Rahu salivated as he awaited his taste of ambrosial bliss. Eventually, it was Rahu's turn to receive the vessel, and he eagerly received the vessel of ambrosia, and he raised it above his head and tipped it ever so deliberately, such that a single shimmering drop of precious ambrosia descended towards his eager, outstretched tongue. But Rahu was seated between the sun and the moon, the sun god and the moon god, each of which have the power to illumine, to shed light wherever they go. Now, everyone was focusing on whomever was becoming immortal in that moment. And in this moment, it was Rahu. So the sun and the moon, by virtue of their light, spotted the demon in disguise. And the sun god, Surya, exclaimed, "Vishnu, there is a demon among us." And all were aghast, and Vishnu jumped to his feet in the blinking of an eye and launched his Sudarshana chakra, his discus, his divine discus. He launched it and it sailed through the air towards the neck of the demon. Just as a drop of elixir was descending towards his tongue. Now, what on earth would be the outcome of this event? Were the discus to arrive first to his neck, he would certainly be decapitated and therefore dead, and the dead can surely not be immortal. Were the elixir to pass through his neck and be imbibed by his body, he would become immortal, and the immortal cannot become dead. So which is it? Remember what I said before about whether it is A or it is B? In fine Indic style, they both happen at the same time. The discus decapitates the neck of the demon just as the drop of ambrosia is passing there through. And so what is the result of this paradox? He is both dismembered as he is immortalized. Okay? There are now two immortal halves of self of the demon Swarbhanu. The body without a head, Ketu, i.e. the south node of the moon, and the head without a body, Rahu, i.e. the north node of the moon. Okay, so Rahu chases the sun and the moon to this day, having never forgiven them for this act, for this encounter, for this altercation. When he catches up, he swallows them, but having no body, they pass straight through him. The conjunction of Rahu and the sun marks a solar eclipse, and when Rahu gobbles up the moon, it creates a lunar eclipse. It's a bit more complicated than that. It can entail Ketu, but you get the idea. It's brilliant mythologization of the process whereby the luminaries are eclipsed. And what does all of this mean? Well, the Rahuvian impulse, which we'll focus on for a moment, is the impulse towards individuation, individuality, but not tempered individuality that is mindful of harmony. Rahu's a narcissist. Me, 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 me. There's no space for anyone else's needs, anyone else's wants. Rahu's a shapeshifter. Everything is someone else's fault. Rahu is the king of false promises, of pretending to be something it is not. What Rahu most desires is power. And we can think of power as occurring in two varieties, secular or spiritual. To use shorthand, king or the priest. The one who rules, i.e., one who wields secular power, social power, or one who wields spiritual power. So, by virtue of this principle in the human experience, this is why charlatans are so overrepresented among spiritualists, among spiritual practitioners, and especially spiritual leaders. Many more con men per capita among spiritual teachers than math teachers or other vocations. Many more con men per capita among politicians, leaders, those who seek power, tend to care about other people, tell people whatever they want to hear in order to wield power, and then just use it for their own advantage in an enormously toxic and short-sighted manner. This is the energy of Rahu. And so this energy is empowered during eclipses. It is a time when the sun and moon are understood to lose energy, power, and the nodes, Rahu in particular, to gain energy, to be strong. So it might be a time, not just the moment of the eclipse, but to the day, the days leading after, the days following, I should say, where all things Rahuvian gain power. Now, in certain cases, that might be benevolent or useful. In most cases, that is absolutely detrimental to human relationships, the human consciousness, to awareness. What is detrimental to awareness? Well, shadow, the occlusion of awareness, right? It's like, I'm, decent with math, but, spiritual, psycho-spiritual math, hey, it's where I live. Can't put up an IKEA shelf, but can change someone's life who's actually putting up an IKEA shelf by talking about their beliefs and their relationships. No problem. So this sort of makes sense to me, as I hope it's making sense to you, that luminaries represent light and awareness, and the nodes represent shadow and the occlusion of awareness. And yes, they are oil and water. Yes, they're inimical, but yes, that is too binary. a modality to be truly wise, because reality doles in spectra, not switches. Dial versus switch. And the interplay of shadow and light, the relationship of shadow of light is such that the one defines the other. And shadow, an encounter with shadow, will necessarily confer light. There are three experiences that are the most embittering experiences to human beings. I'll pontificate about the other two another day. But being betrayed, this disillusionment where somebody fooled you, pretended to be something they weren't, and the rug was ripped out from beneath you, especially in a situation that matters or someone you cared about and you trusted. This is an extraordinarily embittering experience, without question. And yet, it is an extraordinarily instructive experience. You necessarily learn something very, very important about the world, about that person, which you did not know before. And more importantly, you learn something very important about yourself. Once you learn all there is to learn about yourself, you are self-realized and therefore awakened. So perhaps these reflections are useful in terms of processing the nature of eclipses, processing the import of this energy for one particular nation besieged with misinformation and delusion. Perhaps one can meditate upon what this means for that nation's election cycle, which is occurring in this year. And perhaps one is not called to lament over that which is beyond one's control. Perhaps in times of great darkness, one is called to cultivate and share light. I hope that you have, benefited from or enjoyed this transmission a fraction as much as I've enjoyed sharing it with you. Recall correctly, I did create a course on this very myth of the churning of the ocean. I think it's potentially the most powerful, insightful myth cycle I've ever come across with respect to the mechanics of waking up, the pursuit of consciousness. Because the quest for the ambrosia of life is very much a metaphor for the quest for awakening, for capital T truth. There is such a course at the Indian Wisdom School. Feel free to check it out. Feel free to contact me if I may be of service to your education, your spiritual education in particular. And feel free to reach out for requests for further content. Until next time, take good care of yourself and pay attention. Pay close and careful attention, because the truth without question will set you free. Namaste.